A few weeks ago, I had an evening completely to myself. Nowhere to be, nothing to do, no plans. The kind of evening you tell a stressed out friend to be grateful for. So I sat down in the chair and I decided I was just going to sit there. Not read anything, not half watch anything, just be in the evening for a while. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. Around the 10-minute mark, a very specific feeling showed up. One I think most people will recognize the second I describe it. A kind of low, itchy guilt, like I was getting away with something I shouldn't. Not boredom exactly, more like an internal voice quietly clearing its throat. You never answered that email. You could be reading right now. And within a couple minutes I was up, doing something, anything, that would let me feel like the evening had been earned rather than just spent. The strange part is I hadn't broken any actual rule. Nobody was waiting an email. There was no consequence anywhere in sight. And yet 10 minutes of sitting quietly in my own home had produced something that felt uncomfortably close to shame. That's the part that stuck with me. I had time. I had the space. What I apparently didn't have was the ability to just occupy it without the feeling like I was doing something wrong. So, why is that so hard? Not physically. Sitting still is not a demanding physical task. We've all survived worse. We've sat through meetings. I mean psychologically, almost morally hard, if that makes sense. Because here's the part that actually got me. Doing nothing didn't feel neutral. It felt a little bit like getting away with something. So the first explanation that came to my mind was, I still had things on my plate. The guilt wasn't random. It was just my to-do list tapping me on my shoulder. Fair enough, that's a real phenomenon. Unfinished tasks do sit in the back of your mind. Except that doesn't hold up, because this isn't a one-time thing that is tied to one messy week. I felt that same 10-minute itch on days with nothing outstanding at all. Everything done, inbox empty, nothing hanging over me. The guilt still showed up. In a way that felt like it wasn't actually responding to my to-do list, but rather to the silence itself. Something rushes in to fill that kind of space, almost aggressively. So it's not really about unfinished business. Convenient explanation, sure, but it's a symptom. Standing in for something else, something underneath it. Took me a while to actually land on the real question here. It's not why do I have too much to do? It's why does unstructured time feel unbearable even when nothing, literally nothing, is being demanded of me? Which is a strange question if you sit with it for a second. Doing nothing should be the one task nobody can fail at. No skill required, no equipment, no real effort. And yet it might be the single hardest discipline most people alive today have never ever practiced on purpose. I think a lot of the confusion here, mine included, comes from a language problem. We use doing nothing to describe two experiences that aren't actually the same thing at all. There's idleness and there's rest. And they get treated as synonyms, and they're not. Rest is restorative. Sleep, a slow walk, lying in the grass until your brain stops buffering. Rest still points somewhere, even if that somewhere is just being able to function tomorrow. Idleness doesn't point anywhere. It's unstructured, undirected time with no restorative alibi attached to it. It's not resting for something later. It's just time. existing for no reason, answering to nobody. And this is the thing. Idleness is what we've actually managed to eliminate. Not rest. We're still fairly good at rest. Vacation still happens. Weekends technically exist. What doesn't exist much anymore is unclaimed time. Even our relaxation has a job now. Self-care isn't self-care. It's a to-do list that changed into a bathrobe. We let an app judge our sleep like a disappointed gym coach checking a clipboard. Rest survived. Idleness, on the other hand, got quietly legislated out of existence. Guilt doesn't show up for no reason though. That's worth sitting with for a second. If doing nothing felt neutral, I wouldn't have jumped out of the chair 10 minutes after. I just have sat there and stayed sat there. The fact that idleness produces actual discomfort means something installed that feeling in us on purpose, or at least by accident over a long stretch of time. Max Weber wrote about this over a century ago, the Protestant work ethic. The idea that unproductive time wasn't just wasteful, it was closer to sinful. Work stopped being how you survived and became how you proved something, that you were disciplined, worth your keep. And once productivity turns into a stand-in for moral worth, doing nothing stops being neutral. It becomes evidence. Evidence you are not producing and therefore you are not valuable. You don't need to believe in any of the theology for the logic to still be running somewhere underneath. You just need that flicker of guilt when you're just sitting there. Honestly, it's a strange thing to inherit if you think about it. Somebody else's anxiety 3 centuries later with none of the furniture that came with it. There's something right about the old ethic though, and I don't want to skip past that. Discipline matters. Contribution matters. Pure permanent idleness isn't flourishing either. Nobody's final regret is, I really should have done nothing. So the instinct wasn't wrong exactly. Idleness taken to an extreme does curdle into something closer to self-abandonment. What went wrong was scope. A reasonable warning against laziness got quietly stretched into a blanket suspicion of stillness itself. Full stop, no exceptions. And that's roughly the version we ended up with. Minus the theology, plus all of the anxiety. There is a second explanation. Less theological, more mechanical, and honestly more uncomfortable. Idle time doesn't guarantee value. And we live inside the system that's gotten remarkably efficient at making unmonetized time feel like a character flaw. It's strange that we have to say spend time. Same verb as for money. Not a coincidence, I don't think, more like a leak. Economic language seeping into how we experience our own hours. And if time is something you spend, then doing nothing with it stops being neutral. It becomes a loss, an asset sitting there, depreciating, watching you. Under that framing, an unproductive afternoon doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like a failure of asset management. And here's the part that actually bothers me. We've absorbed that logic so completely, it now governs moments that have nothing to do with money whatsoever. Sitting with your own thoughts, watching your kid in a yard, staring out of a train window like a man in a French film about to have a revelation, except you stop in 11 minutes and you're tired. None of this is a transaction. It still gets treated like one though, because we've trained ourselves to ask the same question in every single hour. What does this produce? Now at this point I imagine someone's going to push here. And they should. Isn't some structure good for people? Don't we generally do better with routine, with discipline, with actual goals? Yes, I meant that. This isn't heading towards some finale where I tell you to burn your calendar and go live in the woods, answering to no clock, no boss, no nothing. Tempting some Mondays, not the argument though. The difference is between structure that serve a life and structure that's quietly become the entire definition of one. First kind is a tool, second kind is a tool that somewhere along the line put itself in charge. Nobody chooses to eliminate idleness on purpose. It happens slowly, one optimized morning routine at a time, until the tool that was supposed to work for you starts handing you the terms. So what's idleness for then, if it's not just laziness with a nicer suit? Here's what surprised me digging into this. Idle time isn't empty. There's a real cognitive work happening in the background, specifically when you're not focused on anything. Psychologists call it the default mode network, which sounds bureaucratic but basically just means that the brain activity that switches on when you stop pointing your attention at a task, daydreaming, boredom, walking somewhere with no particular destination. And that's apparently when a lot of the important stuff happens. Connecting memories, processing emotion, the kind of insight that never shows up when you're staring at a problem. So boredom might not be a malfunction, might actually be closer to a feature. Some of the better ideas I've had weren't earned through effort at all. They showed up staring at nothing, precisely because my mind had finally been let off the leash for 5 minutes. Which explains why I have genuinely good ideas in the shower and none at the desk. If that's true though, a culture that engineered idleness out of the daily life hasn't just made us busier, it made us shallower. We optimized away the exact condition that produces depth in the first place. So, not in theory, in the actual texture of somebody's week, what does a life with no idleness in it produce? Someone who experiences stillness as a threat instead of a gift, for one thing. Someone whose sense of worth runs entirely downstream of output. Someone who's basically never met their own mind without a task standing between them. That's the part that actually got me sitting with it. If you never spend time inside an unstructured hour, you never really find out who you're underneath all the functions that you perform. You know yourself as an employee, as a parent, somebody who produces things. You might just never go around to knowing yourself as a person, full stop, with nothing to prove to anybody, including yourself, which might be the harder audience anyway. There's a freedom that only shows up in unclaimed time. Thinking a thought that doesn't lead anywhere, noticing something nobody assigned you to notice, just existing for a stretch of minutes without justifying the expense. Take idleness out entirely, and you take out the only conditions where that particular freedom is even possible. So, going back to the original question, why does it feel almost illegal to do nothing? Not laziness, not really an overstuffed to-do list either, even though that makes an easy target. It's an old moral suspicion of stillness, fused onto a modern economic habit of treating every hour like an asset that needs managing. And somewhere in that combination, unclaimed time stopped feeling like a right and start feeling like something you're getting away with. And here's the part I didn't expect to land on. Idleness isn't the opposite of a well-lived life. It might actually be one of the requirements for it. Not because doing nothing is virtuous on its own, but because it is the one remaining space where you're not performing a function for anybody. And somebody who never sets foot in that space loses more than some downtime. They lose the only room in the house where they might actually run into themselves. Productivity tells you what you're worth. idleness is really the only thing left that bothers asking you who you are, which might be worth defending, not by scheduling it, definitely not by optimizing it, just by sitting down some ordinary evening and doing nothing at all. Even if 10 minutes in, you catch yourself guilty for doing exactly that.